My guest this morning in this hour, forever how long we're together, is usually we've been going over an hour, and I'm good with that because that means the discussion is good, is Dr. KenZoe Brian J. Selassie. He is an incredibly talented and dynamic critical theories research scholar and professor, guest lecturer and keynote speaker, nonprofit resource development and communications consultant, and public servant professional. Dr. KenZoe Brian J. Selassie is a critical theories research scholar and professor. He specializes in intercultural rhetoric, African American rhetoric, sociolinguistics, cultural centricities, Africana, womanism, and literary tradition, mass media communication, and nonverbal communication. His research primarily focuses on Black life dynamics in hip-hop and American popular culture's mass media. He is a former District of Columbia Division Administrator, current District of Columbia Commissioner for the Commission on African American Affairs, and serves as chair of the Department of English, Foreign Languages and Mass Communication at Benedict College. Dr. Selassie earned a Doctor of Philosophy in Communication and Culture from Howard University, a Master of Organizational Management from the University of Phoenix, a Master of Public Administration from Walden University, and a Bachelor of Arts in Mass Media Communication from the University of Mount Union, formerly Mount Union College. He is also a 2016-2017 Fulbright Scholar. As a critical research scholar and professor, Dr. Selassie specializes in intercultural rhetoric, African American rhetoric, sociolinguistics, cultural centricities, Africana, womanism, and nonverbal communication. He has developed critical research focused on Black life communicative dynamics with hip-hop, Africana, womanism, and African cultural traditions as they each intersect American pop culture's radio, television, film, and social media. He has presented his research at national and international conferences and is a student-centered professor who champions mentorship and college readiness for the marginalized populations, particularly African and African-descended people. I am honored and humbled and excited and glad and happy and any other adjective you want to use to have Dr. KenZoe Brian J. Selassie on the air with me. I am thrilled because this is a brother and an educated brother, because, you know, he could probably wear that T-shirt that says "Danger, Educated Black Man," for sure. And I am thrilled because I am just happy to see that, for a lot of different reasons. Not to mention we have a lot of commonalities, particularly in the communication thing, because one of my degrees is in communications. I have one in business, one in education, and the communications piece I use constantly, of course, on the radio, the podcasting, the blogging, so forth and so on. So I totally get that and relate and can appreciate everything that we were talking about in that bio. So with that being said, Dr. KenZoe Brian J. Selassie, good morning and welcome to the Reading Circle.
Good morning. How are you?
I am better now. I mean, I thought I was good in the 6 o'clock hour, but man, after reading that bio and talking to you for them couple of minutes, I'm even better. Listening audience, if you've been following the show, over the last few weeks, you know we have been actually doing a series, if you will. And the series is based on the book News Chaser, The Rhetoric of Trump in Essays and Commentaries. And, you know, we've had on the show, we've had Anne Marie. We had her earlier. Then we had Jamie. Then we had Angelica. And now we have KenZoe. And KenZoe's contribution to the book is The Art of the Rhetoric of White Nationalism. And what I was explaining to KenZoe, as well as the rest of them, it seems that each week, whatever chapter we're on, coincides with something that's gone on with the week prior to the show. And this week is...
That's scary, though. I hope the book isn't guiding what happened.
It might be foreshadowing. I don't know.
We may have too much ancestral power in that book. Wait a minute. We might need to rewrite some things.
Well, I tell you what, it's coming right down the pike. Like when I talked to Angelica last week, the whole thing about the womanism and so forth, the women's, it fell right in line with something that had gone on the week prior. When I spoke with Anne Marie, it was the same thing with Jamie. So, I mean, to me, I think it ought to be confirmation that of what the book is really about, because it's not, I mean, if there ever was one that's always talking about fake news, I mean, that's one of his main lines is fake news. And the truth of the matter is he's the author of all of this fake news. But this book is not fake news. This book is the real deal.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And I mean, in the context of it being the real deal, like if people are questioning, well, you know, how do I know what one book represents as the real deal to another book's, you know, made up, imaginative narrative, it's because you have scholars from a variety of different fields that are orienting much of their research in fact. Like we fact find and we make sure that there's evidence to support many of the arguments that we are making so that there's clarity around how valid and reliable what we are contributing to this book and what we contribute to the public sphere, you know, actually is.
And see, this is where you all have him beat. And when I say that is because he is not one for reading. He's not very well read. And that's not just me saying that. That's just the truth of the matter. He's not very well read. He doesn't really, I don't think, likes to read, even though he tries to pretend like, because even earlier on, whenever he was in the early part, after he just inaugurated, they asked him something about the daily briefings, and he said, "Oh, I don't need that. You know, everybody else can read those. Mike Pence can read those, and the generals can read that. But I don't need someone to tell me every day what's going on because I'm a smart man. This, that, and the other." And I said, "Now that doesn't make any sense. So you don't want to know what's going on around the rest of the world. That's pretty much what that was saying. I don't want to have to read what's going on in the rest of the world. That's kind of like what he was saying. So I'm saying all that to say, in terms of you all actually providing research and fact, anyone that does that with him has him over a barrel. Because most of what he thrives and operates on is from Fox News or from watching CNN or whatever. That's kind of like, I mean, half the time he gets his news from what a radio DJ said or a TV commentator. And he runs with it.
Right.
So
part of that is the egotism of being able to try to operate on snippets. And it's something that has been portrayed in the world as now a way to function, a way to engage in journalism, a way to engage in really everyday life through the various social media platforms that sometimes really only give you so many seconds of, you know, airtime or face time now, if you will, since more things are oriented in both audio and visual modes of communication. But the problem is that in those short snippets, you don't gain enough information to both be able to do a thorough analysis, to be able to fact find, and facts without context also become problematic. And so we have a president who, in the egotism of it all, orients himself into snippets, then tries to make statements or generalizations or commentary otherwise that is oftentimes just not on point, and that's quite disturbing.
It's quite disturbing. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right, because it's one thing to do that as a private citizen in your home or maybe in your own business, your own company. It's another thing to do that as leader of the free world.
Exactly.
So before we even go any further, before we even get into your contribution to the book, I just read that bio at all in various degrees. Talk to me a little bit about what drove you to continue to pursue educating. Because see, I love learning for the sake of learning. I love education for the sake of education, not necessarily about the paper on the wall or the degree or the title of this and the other, but I just love learning. Talk to me a little bit about what has driven you to continue to be in the educational arena? Because, I mean, clearly you've earned all those various degrees.
Mm-hmm. So, really, as a child, I came from a family where my great-grandmother, as far back as I can remember, had encouraged all of her children to get an education if they wanted to. And many of them chose to do that. Many of them actually went into the field of education. My aunt, Joyce Thompson, in Cleveland, Ohio, was a high school teacher for John F. Kennedy High School, and subsequently also brought several generations of my family through that high school. So, my behavior had to generally stay on point. But what I loved was that they still gave me enough space to be me and to be erroneous, to make some pretty critical errors where I had to go back and apologize for some things, or I found myself in detention because the quick wit of my tongue before coming of an age where the repercussion would be more limited, oftentimes kept me in trouble. So it's a fancy way of saying, in essence, I was smart, but also had a smart mouth, right?
Oh, I know folks like that.
My tone and my sarcasm and, those elements that I just seemed naturally equipped with. But in terms of education, my family just always stressed how important an education was. And I think that in many respects it was a double-edged sword. On the one hand, they so stressed it as a way to shift your quality of life that I probably imagined it making my life so easy that to have achieved what I have and for life to still have the types of challenges that I encounter, even in academic space, where there's this surge of anti-intellectualism, if you will, just creates for some barriers that are just kind of like, wow, like, did I just really get all this student loan debt and have all this time spent in the educational arena to have to now entertain anti-intellectualism? Like, well, I've been bamboozled. But on the flip side, in the context of the actual journey to achieve these degrees, a lot of it was because I started out, in essence, in Cleveland, Ohio, feeling as if many of the opportunities that existed were only available to people who had terminal degrees. And when I was attending, actually, at the time when I attended, it was Mount Union College. When I attended Mount Union College, I finished in roughly about 2.5 years, namely because at the time, John F. Kennedy High School had a program in conjunction with Kenyon College where you could take a series of college courses at the same time that you take your high school courses. So by the time I finished high school, I was already at, I believe, a sophomore status. And so just with one summer's worth of courses or what have you, I was able to really sort of run through Mount Union's program. But I'll never forget, I had a advisor who was a feminist and told me one day, she said, yes, you're smart, but you are not graduate school material.
Wow.
And coming from a predominantly black community where all of these people had told me how smart I was, how well I was going to do in life, how much they believed in me, one white woman said that I wasn't graduate school material. And then all of a sudden, I'm thinking, yeah, I've had such a horrible undergraduate experience that I don't ever have to do school again. And that really speaks to a lot of the educational trauma at a variety of different levels. Oftentimes, black people encounter that a lot earlier on than just undergrad, which is why they don't make it to an undergraduate program. But I'll tell you, it really was a traumatic circumstance that traumatized every aspect of anything that I ever felt whole in. And so it wasn't until I started working professionally that this woman named Lydia Finch came to me and said, I want to go to University of Phoenix because at the time our financial institution that we worked for was paying for us to be able to get a free education. She said, but, you're the smartest person I know. You should come with me. And I'm just like, no, absolutely not. I am not doing graduate school after the experience that I've had. And at the time, I may have been only maybe 20, 21 years old because, again, I finished undergrad early. And so I'm like, there is no way I'm going to do this. And so, of course, I went with her to be a support. And the folks at University of Phoenix convinced me that I should actually enroll in their program, that, what did I have to lose? My employer is paying for it. And so I said, okay. And my first course was with this man named Professor Eugene Katz, and it was managerial communication. And to be in that class and to just feel myself come alive with the amount of knowledge and information I had to contribute to the course made it sort of just, it actually healed the trauma and reoriented me back into the truth of my identity, which people had spoken about all that time, you know, in terms of just coming up through the ranks of, you know, elementary school, middle school, and so forth. And so the long and short of that was, once I finished the degree at University of Phoenix, to be able to work and go to school at the same time and not have to feel like I was going to become a broke college student again, it just provided a platform where I felt really empowered to really navigate my own sense of direction and to be able to speak over myself and become very, very leery about how I receive feedback and commentary from other people, realizing that folks have their own agenda and personal feelings that I can't adopt as the foremost sense of direction or the foremost compass that guides where I go and what I believe I can achieve. So that was working for the financial institution. I shifted then into nonprofit because I wanted a way to be able to support the community. And I felt like I could do that through a series of grant writing and fundraising efforts. I knew I would likely transition into government, so I quickly started working on a second master's in public administration, which focused on policy analysis and nonprofit management. And I did that actually. So University of Phoenix actually had in-class sessions as a distance learning program, which was away from their main campus. But the second degree was with Walden University, and I did that degree online while also working. And so I finished that degree, and I transitioned actually into Washington, D.C., where I became the Chief Development Officer for the District Department of the Environment. Really, Washington, D.C. was the first time that I really felt like I had a lot of control and direction over my career and where my education had managed to really start to pay off. Because the return on the investment is how much money you're going to make.
Right.
To be quite honest. Because as those, not only do the student loans have to be paid off, but there's just also a certain quality of life that you have to have. And I mean, I know for myself and probably many of your listeners, much of what people have done as a sacrifice for your benefit throughout life, although people will tell you you are not in debt to them, there's a part of you that in the soul seat knows that there's a debt to be paid back, both in what you contribute to the next generation, but also in how you take care of the people that manage to take care of you.
Correct.
And so my goal was to make enough money, not to just have a good quality of life for myself, but to also be able to make sure that, you know, I remember my grandmother called me one day and said that she had misplaced her paycheck to be able to pay her bills. And I had enough money saved up that I could just as easily go into my account, Western Union the money to her, and it was just, it was sort of that pinnacle moment where it's like, this is it. Like, this is that moment that you wait for to just be able to provide somebody the sense of assurance and relief that they deserve, you know, because
Absolutely.
they have made an investment in you. And so that's really what the two master's degrees were about. But while I was in government, I was also very clear that new administrations occur roughly every 4 years, or, you know, maybe every 8 years if you're really effective and fortunate. And so I needed to figure out what my plan B was. And I'll tell you very honestly, there was that quiet voice inside of me that said, you have to prepare for something else. But I just didn't know what that something else was. And so I started talking to some friends about going back to graduate school. And as I talked to them about this experience of hearing this quiet voice say, you know, shift your attention to what a strong plan B looks like, I set my attention on Howard University. But even then, the echoes, the supposedly healed trauma of what this woman at, you know, Mount Union College had said to me in the communications department, it still bothered me. It still had me feeling like, okay, now this is a PhD. This is Howard University. This is something totally different that I may not be ready for. And so the long and short was that with about a week to spare, I had applied for Howard University's program and pulled all of my materials together. I got in, and I was met with some of the most wonderful professors, and I don't say that just because of the knowledge they accumulated, like Dr. Melbourne S. Cummings, Dr. Carolyn S. Stroman, William Starasta, Richard Wright, but it was because they really understand Black culture and Black people and how to tap into and activate the intellect that exists in you. Now, they don't give you that, but they access and tap what's already there.
And that's what teaching is. That's what teaching really is.
Absolutely. And so the benefit, right, is then to have master teachers. Now, a lot of folks are out there as teachers, but to engage with someone who is a master teacher, that's the ability that they have to be able to activate that which is already in you and pull that to the forefront so that you live in that experience and can call upon that as a skill at any time you wish.
That is correct, because in terms of education comes from the root educere. And educere is pulling out what's already in. And many people think education is about pouring in or pouring on, when education really is about pulling out. So you're right on point whenever you said, no, it's not that they gave that to me. They pulled what was already in me out. And the other piece that I'm sitting here, I was listening to you reflecting on the statement that was made to you. And in my mind, I was trying to think of any of Caucasians that I know, or any of my Caucasian friends, or any of my Caucasian guests. I don't think I've ever heard of one of them say that anyone told them that they weren't college material. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. And I share with folks all the time. In any school that I lead, if I have any guidance counselor or anyone make that statement, I'm going after tenure charges. And I make that very clear up front. When I meet with my guidance counselors and I meet with our staff and this and the other, I let them know, if I ever hear tell of you telling a child that particular statement, I am going to seek tenure charges. For the very reason that I just heard, those words stayed with you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Regardless of what you obtained, those words were still there.
Yeah. Yeah. But, the power of Black culture is that we oftentimes, and we do it mainly through language, where we re-signify something, right? We take something that's intended to harm us and we reconstitute the energy and meaning of that thing and use it for something else. So this story that I'm actually telling is something that I actually openly share with students so that they don't think that I arrive at a PhD that just always was a PhD, as if I don't have a history or trajectory of challenges and obstacles that I've had to overcome. And I share that with them so that they understand that the educational process is a system that you have to learn how to navigate.
Yes.
And you have to learn what the rules are, both espoused and enacted, but you also have to be able to equip yourself with allies and a lot of self-talk. Like, it's those quiet moments where you're curled up in a corner, frustrated because you have to go to work and you have to work 2 different jobs, or you have kids and then you also have to study and the readings are difficult and all of these different things. But it's the self-talk that says, but I'm going to do this. Ironically enough, I actually had friends that said when I wanted to go to Howard University, because I did not want to give up my job while attending Howard University.
Right.
And so that speaks to some aspect. Howard University is going to kill me for saying this. But so I actually worked full-time. I went to school full-time. I taught part-time. And then I volunteered with the Boys and Girls Club on the weekends. And my friends were like, that's not possible. Like, there's not enough time in the day for you to be able to do that. And so what I did was I bought a mountain bike, and I could bike from where our office was at, like 1200 First Street Northwest, all the way over to 700 Bryant Street Northeast in about 7 minutes. And so I would literally wait until the absolute last minute at work to be able to run out of the office, leave, bike over to Howard University, teach my class for like 50 minutes, since I had generally Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes, which are 50-minute increments of class, jump back on my bike back over to my workplace, using that as, in essence, my lunch period, stay, get my work done, then turn around and have to leave out so that I could actually go to class in the evenings. And I did that for roughly about 2.5 years before starting my dissertation. And I have to tell you, as crazy as it sounds, it was the most exhilarating fun I've ever had, because what it showed me was that anything is possible when you put yourself in control of the circumstance. Now, granted, I don't encourage people to, be unethical. I don't encourage people to break laws. I don't encourage people to really even break rules generally. But there are some instances where the rules aim to confine people to a limited scope of their capability, so that people don't get harmed, hurt, stressed out, what have you. But you really got to be able to make a determination about when certain rules apply to you and when they don't.
Right.
And I've become very acutely aware of when I think rules apply to me and when they don't. And I'd rather get sort of a tap on the wrist to say, no, this rule applies to you, and have given it a good go, than to sit back waiting for people's permission, because people oftentimes limit you to what they think they are capable of.
That's correct.
What you are capable of. So, I hope that, for whomever is listening, I hope that this sort of speaks to whatever circumstance people find themselves in, where they want to sort of be the captain of their ship and navigate, this life on their own terms, but are afraid to. I hope this really encourages them to be able to do that, because the benefits of learning about who you are and achieving what it is that you desire, or at least getting close to what you hope to achieve in what you desire, becomes something that is very real for them, and something that they now feel encouraged to be able to pursue.
Well, I tell you what,
that's the end of my education.
There is an old saying that speaks to what you just said, and that is, it's easier to ask forgiveness than to ask permission.
Absolutely.
And also, what I heard you say was, and I didn't hear you say anything about breaking for what you were doing in terms of biking back and forth and leaving at the last minute and doing it. I didn't necessarily hear in that any breaking of any rules. What I did hear was some prioritization and what meant something to you doing whatever you needed to do to get that done. And the other piece of that, in terms of quote unquote breaking of the rules, it is really in perception. The breaking of the rules is about perception. And I'll tell you what I'm talking about. There's a difference, and from the human eye, you might not be able to see it, but there's a difference from somebody looting or stealing because they are hungry and they have absolutely nothing. When somebody who's destitute, homeless, it's a difference. Now, stealing is wrong. We get that. Stealing is breaking the law is one thing, but there is a difference between someone who has nothing and is taking something to eat in order to live, as opposed to someone who is just stealing for the sake of stealing, for the fun of it. Or, they're going to steal it to sell it, or they have some other means, something else they're going to do. There's a total difference in that. So I understand what you're saying, and it's not misinterpreted. And like I said, at the end of the day, people do what they really want to do, because...
So listen, I hope your listeners got that. Like, I really hope people understood what you're saying, because in what you are saying lies the difference between a statement being made by an African-centered person, like a person who, so when I say African-centered, I mean somebody who is in a functional, healthy way thinking through a Black cultural perspective.
Right.
That Black cultural perspective that you just spoke speaks to the truth of types of justices, right? But what we live in is a European-dominated paradigm, a European-dominated way of thinking, way of being, a value system that says, no, the rule is the rule, and so the rule just has to rigidly apply to everyone. The same way that medicine has a general all size fits everyone approach. And it's like, this cannot be so. And as much as I sometimes cringe at the thought of all people not being created equally, it is in fact so. All people are not created equally in the context of are doing and being by virtue of our purpose. And it's our purpose that starts to shift, and in part experience, but it starts to shift who we are, and what we are permitted to be able to do.
Absolutely. And again, it's back to, in terms of the rules, you've got me in another area where I love talking about. I mean, all of these areas for me are fascinating debates and discussion points, because even when you get down to rules, the rules, again, are in the eyes of the beholder or the creator. Right. And in terms of, let's say, for example, affirmative action, depending on how you define affirmative action, because affirmative action is affirmative action. But whenever you get into the African American culture, what affirmative action connotes is different whenever the same actions are done within the European or the Caucasian or whatever you want to call it society. And case in point, when I worked in corporate America, and when I first started there, I was young. My first job was as a secretary. And I was secretary for a district manager at the time, and I received a call from a friend of his, and he asked for the person I was working for. And I said, he's not available right now. He asked, may I take a message? He says, yes, I'm such and such. Let such and such know that my daughter is going to apply with him for the job. And, when he hires her, do not let her know that we know each other and we've had this conversation. Now, in my mind, that's affirmative action.
Yeah, correct.
But now, whenever you now apply that same whenever you say affirmative action, in another context, they think it's a handout or a freebie. Okay. Same thing with when you start talking the welfare system or this, that, and the other. Folks don't get into the number, because I'm working my way to the book. A lot of these policies that are being done away with or altered or bashed, folks don't realize that the larger population of Caucasians and poor Caucasians are going to be affected just as bad, if not worse, than the African Americans and Latinos and everybody else that they think is sucking the system dry.
Right.
So when you start talking about rules, that's in the eye of the beholder. That's in the eye of the creator. And I'm not talking about the creator meaning God, I'm talking about the man-made creator. Because those rules change and shift, like you said, based on agenda.
Right. That's right.
They really do. So in terms of when you're talking, because I look at all these degrees as an African-American man, and you say, even with all of that, I'm still, the intellectual is still questioned, which is, again, that is amazing. I'm sitting here looking at a master. Wait a minute. First of all, we'll go to the doctorate. A doctor of philosophy and communication and culture, a master of organizational management, a master of public administration, a bachelor in mass media communications, and a Fulbright scholar. And yet the intellectual capacity is still questioned solely based on the color of your skin.
Yeah. And, for all intents and purposes, I have pretty lengthy locks, and I have a tattoo on my neck. Which is all fairly intentional, just because, it helps demystify this idea that, if you're out of the hood or out of any pocket that does not look like ultra-conservatism, that there's no possible way that you could be a PhD.
Right.
And I think that a newer generation of my peers are really starting to demystify that. Even Mark Lamont Hill's swag, if you will, echoes the likes of, Black culture, Black consciousness. And those things become really important for younger Black people to be able to see, because it gives them a sense of orientation where they see themselves in certain spaces. So even though we don't have the types of communities any longer where we are their neighbors necessarily, albeit that I oftentimes try to find predominantly Black communities to live in, although we aren't necessarily their neighbors in as great a mass as what we were historically, social media still provides those platforms. Your radio show provides those platforms for our voices to be heard, for our images to be seen, and for young people to recognize that there's nothing wrong with your sense of you-ness. Melbourne Cummings at Howard University told me one day, because I said, I don't write as eloquently as some of the other students. Like, I feel a bit out of place. Like my pedigree is not exactly what one needs. I mean, now, and I'm speaking more so my educational pedigree. Other aspects were just fine. But she said to me, every experience you have managed to have has led you to this place. And
correct.
To this point.
I agree.
And let go of none of it, because all of it is a part of you and all of it is contributing to this experience. And when she said that, and this is the beauty of being among healthy, functional Black people. I tell students all the time, there's dysfunctional Black culture and there's functional Black culture. The same way that there's functional whiteness in the context of white culture, if you will, and dysfunctional white culture, racism, white privilege, all of those things become aspects of dysfunction, if you will. But in this context, people like Dr. Melbourne Cummings really help to heal a lot of the trauma. And the goal is that throughout life, you should be trying to find people that heal you, because when people are able to heal you, they fill those voids with good things that make you whole again, instead of things that just plaster over the wound, and that thing sort of festers into more infection, right? So you become more of a broken person. Hey, Mark, ironically enough, that same professor that told me that I wasn't graduate school material, my professor, Melbourne Cummings, and I were at a national conference where I was presenting,
right?
And we bumped into her. And my professor, Melbourne Cummings, had the delight, because she knew about this story, and so she knew exactly who the person was, because I pulled her to the side and I said, "That's her. That's the woman that said this." She said, "Okay, follow my lead." And she stopped the woman and she asked, are you, so and so? Because I don't
right.
Total blast. She's listening. She knows who she is. But she said, "Yes, I am." She said, "Do you remember telling a student that they weren't graduate school material?" And so she started pulling at me the way that a mama would pull.
Right.
Get over your voice. And so I'm standing there with this look on my face, wow, I cannot believe this is happening. But she said, yes. She said she vaguely remembers saying that because she had only said it once in her lifetime. And she said, "Well, I'd like to introduce you to Doctor." And, I mean, the look on her face was just oh, God, if I could just disappear. It was just one of those full circle moments that is so sweet. And so, for a lot of your listeners, I say that if people have discouraged you from being
right.
the fullness of anything that you envision for yourself, pursue it anyway. Go after it anyway, because I promise you there will be those full circle moments, because every circle that you are in control of is a circle that does not have to be left unbroken.
That's correct. And
all circles should be made complete.
That was karma or divine intervention or divine retribution, whatever you want to call it. It was, like you said, the circle coming full circle. And speaking of that, I need to take a short break. But if you've just joined me, I hope you've been with me since 6, really, but certainly since 7, and continue to join us. Get on all of your social media sites and say, "You know what, child, there's a discussion you need to hear on gobrave.org. And if you're in the northern New Jersey area, 88.7 FM in the New York area and New Jersey area, you know how we child and we tell everything else. And now there's something worth listening to. Tell them to get up and get their computers on, get on the internet or get on the radio in northern New Jersey, because this is a discussion worth having, because there's some other questions that I'm going to get into based on Dr. KenZoe's background, based on the fact that he's in sociolinguistics and centricities and womanism. There's some questions I'm going to ask, especially in our community. When I say I'm talking about the African American community, and you just heard him talking about our uniqueness and our being who we are. But there's certain things that I think we do that actually work to our detriment. I want to talk about that after I share this information with you. So don't you dare move. Stay where. The only movement I want you to do is typing on your social media sites or talking into it or whatever you need to do to get the message out that they need to be listening to this show this morning, because it is something that we need to listen and think about. As I said earlier, just about most of the things that I do, particularly in terms of communication, is about having you to think. I'm not necessarily looking for agreement. I'm not necessarily looking for you to agree, but at least I want you to raise your consciousness to say, you know what, I hadn't looked at it that way. Now, you may wind up, you may land in the same place you was prior to us saying what we're saying, but at least you gave it some thought, which I don't think most people do. That's why my blog post was titled, I Think Too Deep. And Brian said it earlier, or KenZoe said it earlier, in terms of the snippets. See, I'm convinced, KenZoe, that we are a soundbite society.
Oh, yeah.
You can tell us anything and we run with it and go on to our next thing. And so I guess I could be considered a conspiracy theorist to a degree, because some of this stuff, and I said it last week with Angelica, some of this stuff just don't make sense to me that we've been fed. But I'll get into that a little bit later. But folks, I'm going to share some information with you, but you know what you need to do.
Chris, you're not acting like a grown-up in our relationship.
Am too.
There's your comic book collection, the race car bed.
I'm young at heart, but I put money into my 401k every paycheck. I'm taking control over my financial life, and that feels pretty grown-up to me.
Put away a few bucks, feel like $1 million. For free ideas and easy ways to save, go to feedthepig.org. That's feedthepig.org. Are those footy pajamas?
This message brought to you by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants and the Ad Council.
I really didn't feel safe anymore at home.
Every year, tens of thousands of youth experience homelessness.
The possibility of sleeping out on a park bench, it's not something that a 15-year-old should have to think about.
1-800-RUNAWAY provides 24-hour access to a nationwide network of housing and support services.
I felt such warmth. I felt comfort. I felt safe.
Call 1-800-RUNAWAY. Go to 1-800-RUNAWAY.org or text 66008. We can end youth homelessness.
Music, the vinyl frontier. Tune into the adventures of Rewind to Now. Its weekly mission: to explore time-honored music, to seek out lesser-known bands and forgotten tunes, to boldly go where the music is the star of the show. How you doing, G-Man checking in? Set your radio, computer, and tricorder to the one program that enables you to experience the future of the past through the music. We interface Sundays at 9 a.m. Prepare to be transported to a world where the music is fascinating. Set your coordinates to Rewind to Now. It's the logical thing to do. No bones about it.
You're listening to The Reading Circle with Marc Medley on Brave New Radio.
All right, I don't do anything that I don't ask. I don't ask anybody to do what I am not willing to do myself. And when I say that is while I was on the little break there, while I was sharing the information with you, I was on my social media sites as well. And I went on there and I put, this discussion is one we all need to hear. Dr. KenZoe Brian J. Selassie is on the air with me now on GoBrave.org. So that went out, that just went out to all my social media sites while that little intermission was going on there. And we're working our way up to the book News Chaser, but because Dr. KenZoe or Dr. Selassie, whichever one he prefers, because the topic matter and the educational experience and background is so diverse, there's a lot of directions we can go. And I'm very quickly, while we're on the air together, touch on as many as I can. And since his area is rhetoric, African American rhetoric, intercultural rhetoric, social linguistics. See, I like saying it because it's a mouthful. It's a good tongue twister for me. It works my mouth there. Social linguistic, cultural centricities, Africana womanism, and literary traditions, as well as mass communications, verbal and nonverbal communications. Because I have a love for communications. I really do. And the verbal and the nonverbal. I teach public speaking. And so we get into the different facets of what's said and what's not said. But let's talk a little bit about in terms of, In the African American community, one of my, and again, I get into a constant debate and discussion about this, and sometimes people fall in the line of our uniqueness, if you will. And I don't necessarily, in my mind, believe what I'm about to ask you falls in that category, but some do. And that is the use of, they nicely put it the N-word, but I don't have a problem with saying nigga. I really don't. But this constant use of it for me is like, I don't know of any group of people that has taken a term that was derogatory and so-called in their mind turned it around to be cute, or in their mind we've now taken control of it. That argument doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because when we were being called niggers, and even to this day when we're called niggers, whether it's verbal or nonverbal, it is still derogatory. So I don't care how you spell it, whether it's N-I-G-G-E-R, N-I-G-G-A-H, N-I-G-G-A, N-I, whatever. To me, I don't understand that. And maybe you can help me out that since you're into the linguistics and sociolinguistics and all, maybe you can kind of help me understand some of the thinking behind. I have young men that they cannot get a sentence out with saying, yo, man, you should have seen that nigga, man, that nigga. Oh, man, that's my nigga. Yo, what's up, my nigga? Maybe you can help me understand that. I work in a school, so I know what I hear every day.
Oh, man. So, all right. So I unfortunately probably am not gonna be much help to you or your listeners. People are gonna be like, oh, I hate them now. But
no. Go ahead.
So generally, I think that there are some things that are not worth really debating about. The N-word alongside like the various names by which we could call the creator, for example, God or Allah, or
right.
However it is that you like. There are just so many different variations that are in accordance to people's personal experiences, people's personal dynamics, and the context of the time, place, and moment, right? So when you pluck certain words out of a certain time and era that people have lived through generationally, then the word starts to take on different forms of meaning unless it's adopted from generation to generation. What I would say as a scholar, and less sort of a personal opinion, is that the idea of hearing young black people speak to each other by virtue of a reference like, that's my nigga, for example, not my N-I-G-G-E-R, but N-I-G-G-A, like, it speaks to this aspect of one of two things. In some instances, the lack of knowledge and understanding about the history of N-I-G-G-E-R and why that came about, what it was intended to make black people feel about themselves as a word that could linguistically oppress, right? Like, linguistic oppression is, in essence, when you use a word to be able to abuse someone.
Right.
But it also speaks to a certain aspect of the population that has managed to heal from the trauma of that word and reorient the sound and pronunciation, the very frequency and vibration of the word crossing your lips into the atmosphere of other people's being able to hear it in the context where it speaks to an element of healing, right? And the effective use of it in a more affirming context. What I oftentimes, on more of a personal note, tell students is, because you don't possibly know who you will offend in the public space, if you choose to use that word in the private context and space by which you and that person are in agreement that that word has personalized meaning and value and understanding. But in the general venue of public space, where you have a variety of different generations colliding, something that looks like it's intergenerational,
right?
Because you don't know who's listening. You know, you got black people listening, you got white people listening, you got Asian people listening, for all intents and purposes. You want to be very cautious about how something that is intended to be an aspect of intimate understanding is conveyed, that it is not miscommunicated, misunderstood, where then you have the likes of, and you know that it's being misunderstood because you have the white folks saying, well, black people call each other that all the time, so I don't know why I can't call them that. Well, it's because, you know, again, it's out of context, and it's intended to be something that should be intimate and private by virtue of that those two or more people's understanding that they have with regard to the positive effect that that word now has as they share it with each other. The same way that females will call each other a B, but they don't call each other no B, just generally in open forum. That's something that they do when they are at each other's house sipping cocktails and, you know, watching movies or having girls' night or, you know, whatever the case may be. So I oftentimes tell them time, place, and moment becomes important in the context of the types of terms that you choose to assign to one another so that the general public is not confused about how it gets applied and who can, in fact, use it.
Now, I'm going to tell you, you said you weren't going to address it, but that's one of the most intelligent answers I've heard to that question yet. Because you're absolutely right. Where we run into trouble is when a Caucasian person now says, well, that's how you all talk to each other. How come I can't come in and say, yo, my nigga? And now you get offended. Now you're ready to fight. Now, you know, we got this whole thing going on. Yo, you call me. But your answer was one of the more intelligent answers, if not the most intelligent answer in terms of that topic I've heard yet. And you're absolutely right in terms of the first definition you gave, which I think, unfortunately, because the second piece of it, if I honestly really thought that people understood the second half of your response, I could live with it. But I think it's more of the first part. I think it's more of the first instead of the latter, where they don't know the history. They don't understand the history of why folks would even get offended at you saying that. That's the part I have trouble with, and this is back to the education piece again, because if you understood your history, I think you have a people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. Marcus Garvey. That's your quote on your webpage. And that's what, unfortunately, and that's what I think for those of us who are in research or in education or whatever, that's what I think is the most frustrating piece of it in terms of, and I'm speaking in the African American community, because there's just certain things that if we truly understood the historical, like the meaning of words, there's just certain things we wouldn't do. We just wouldn't, because we don't want it repeated. Like, okay, because I'm working my way to News Chaser, but we had this whole incident with Charlottesville. And the clip that kept on being shown by the various news media was whenever they were marching and they kept chanting, Jews will not replace us. Jews will not replace us. Now, you can rest assured the Jews are not going to take that, and I don't blame them, because their mantra is never again. And the reason their mantra is never again is because they educate their children from the womb to the tomb on why and how that will never happen again. So they can march all they want talking about Jews will not replace us, but they're not going back to that time frame of the Holocaust. They're not going to be caught up in a situation like that again. And I tell people all the time, and I go back to way back to Martin Luther King, and he says something very similar in terms of African American can learn from our Jewish brothers and sisters. And we can. If we were to educate and know our history the same way or in a similar manner to the way the Jewish population, the way they do, it would African Americans will not replace us. You can say what you want to say. We're not going back to the early 20th century. Mm-hmm. And so that's where, for me, understanding the history of words and clothing and dress and everything else kind of falls into play. I'm not saying we have to become Eurocentric. I'm not saying we have to look like the white man or the white woman, if you will. I'm not saying that. But at the same time, if you understood, because I think you said it earlier, about understanding the game and the system, the education game, the system game, if we understood all that a little bit better, or at least made an effort to understand it and then counter it, I think we would be a whole lot further along.
I agree. But, you know, the other piece, too, is that what I've done in News Chaser is really create a historical delineation from as far back as what I refer to as, and what is generally referred to as the Greco-Roman era, into the modern present-day context of Donald Trump's tweeting, as a way of denoting how important it is to be able to look back as far as one's mind's eye can see, so that we can start to pull out the pattern of things that have managed to sustain themselves as principles that people engage in and enact throughout time. And so what you have often with this idea of black folks saying, well, I can say the word Nigga to my fellow black person as a term of endearment, or as a term that intends to scold, because they'll be like, oh, that nigga ain't.
Right. That's absolutely right.
So we functionally use it for a variety of different reasons, depending on the context of how we're positioning it. But the idea is that all people want an acknowledgement of their privilege.
Right.
And I think that in part, one of the underlying subliminal psychological effects of the use of the word nigga for black people is the ability to be able to now say, well, there is a privilege that we have that has empowered us, right? We've reconstituted the energy of this word into something that empowers us and that we can use with one another exclusively as a black privilege. So every time we use it, we swipe our black card. And what we're trying to tell white people is, in as much as you think everything is supposed to be for you, you don't have a black card. So you can't swipe for privilege using your white card, now use the NIGGER or any other variation, because it's too problematized in the history and legacy of what from one generation to another you all have managed to inherit. So in many respects, I think that it also is about this subliminal idea of trying to find access to privilege that we have otherwise been denied. But we have to be very cautious about what we select as the illusion of privilege, right? That doesn't create detriment. And it's unfortunately one of the things that Othello found out the hard way, that I talk about in News Chaser, by virtue of Othello's being around people who were otherwise white, or as Dr. Marimba Ani refers to in her book, Yurugu, they were, in fact, Yurugu, chaos beings, incomplete spiritual beings that in the dynamic of working with them, being around them, Othello started to adopt a lot of their behaviors and communicative style. And as a result of their trickery and treachery, started to also adopt some of the psychosis and savagery that existed, which is why Othello became then a murderer to his own wife and the lot. So we have to be very careful that we don't assume that whiteness is the standard, right? That we are very clear that whiteness in its own respect does what it does for white people, and that's fine, but blackness functions in a very different type of way, and that we are not just all one human. I hate when people say human race, because we're not a race of humans. We're a species of humans. Right. So if people say, that's my first indication where I'm like, okay, clearly people don't know what they're talking about. I tell people all the time, it's the same difference between where you find a lion and where you find a tiger. Right. Although they are both feline, they are both two different types of feline. Black folks and white folks are two different types of folks, if you will. And where I wanted to put a pin at was this whole notion of the standard, because that's where, to me, we get messed up. Right. And when I say we, I'm talking both sides get messed up in terms of the standard. That's why, and I need to do the weather and all that stuff again. I'm going to do that in a minute. But that's why I struggle with, and I think each one of you have been on, we've had this topic of conversation. And I know you've heard it as an African American, in terms of being able to speak well, and a communications major. I know you've heard it, but your peers or other African American friends will say you talk white, and you just hit it right on the head when you said about whiteness being the standard. And now, so I'm going to stop right there for a minute so I can deliver the weather and do all that kind of good stuff, and then we're going to come back to that, and then we're going to work our way to your piece in News Chaser. And by that time, 9:00 will be here, and we'll be heading out. But we're heading right in there, and you hit it right on the head with this whole notion of the standard. And we've gotten so messed up because the rhetoric, if you will, or the game that's been played, or the whatever you want to call it, has been pushed on us that whiteness is the standard. Right. And we're either always trying to, quote unquote, live up to that standard, or either we're judged by that standard. And there, to me, is where the issues come in. So let me do what I need to do in terms of the FCC and all that good stuff. And then we're going to continue on with our discussion.
WPSC, Wayne, New Jersey. On the radio, 88.7 FM. Online, gobrave.org. A tune-in radio station. Part of the William Patterson Broadcast Network.
Broadcasting live from Hobart Hall in Wayne, New Jersey.
This is
The Innovative.
I think they're really unique.
The Fearless.
They have awesome variety.
The Kick-Ass.
I love Brave New Radio.
The Sensational.
I've never heard anything like it.
This is the one and only Brave New Radio.
Here's your North Jersey weather report.
Right now, we have moved up to 57.5 degrees on our way up to 76 as a high and 55 as a low. Expect plenty of sunshine today, and it's going to be clear tonight. Tomorrow, Sunday, generally sunny despite a few afternoon clouds, high of 77, low of 57. And on Monday, sunny along with a few clouds, high of 75, low of 56. Tuesday, overcast, high of 73, low of 57. Cloudy on Tuesday night. And then on Wednesday, partly cloudy skies, high of 76, low of 60. That weather brought to you right here from the WP 88.7 FM Weather Center. I truly, and each week, I truly hope you've been tuned in and listening. You can, of course, always go to the recorded broadcast on the YouTube channel. You can catch the archives there because that's where I put them up whenever they're done. But I hope you're catching it live. I've been listening this morning as my guest is Dr. KenZoe Brian J. Selassie, and we've been talking about a few things as we work our way up to his contribution in the book News Chaser, The Rhetoric of Trump in Essays and Commentaries. And right before I shared the weather and did the top of the hour with you, KenZoe said something along the lines of about this standard. And I think probably out of everything, and there's this whole notion of that being the standard. And because it's not true. The bottom line is, my issue with the whole statement of you talk white, and I always tell people this is my problem. This is my issue with that. Because most time you hear that from another black person to another black person.
Correct.
My issue with that is, what are you really saying here? Because every white person does not speak correctly, and every black person does not speak incorrectly. Matter of fact, doing something in its proper manner or form is not associated with any race or color. So if you're doing something the way it's supposed to, if you're speaking the King's English and you're speaking the King's English correctly, that has nothing to do with white or black. Okay. So the fact that you're saying, are you saying that as an African American, you should be talking tail backwards? You should be incorrect. You should be splitting your verbs and you should be, what are you saying when you say you talk white? But I think it kind of gets at this whole thing. And back to what you were just saying. And who says white is the standard?
Right. So there are a couple of things. So there is no talking forward, backwards, up, down, left, or right. So what I tell students all the time when they're speaking to me is, generally, as long as I can understand what it is that you're trying to say to me, we're communicating, right? So that alone demystifies this idea of needing to use, if you will, these $50 words that, when put together, really say something as simple as hello and good morning. The idea, though, is this. All people across all cultures, white culture, black culture, and I'm talking racial culture, but really I'm talking, Europeaners, Africans and African descendants, wherever they may be throughout the world, which also includes African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, and the like. All of them have both formal and informal ways that they engage in language.
Correct.
So in essence, what I'm saying is everybody has an Ebonics.
Correct.
However, not everybody's form of Ebonics reaches a level of popular culture. Black folk form of Ebonics happens to reach American popular culture as well as popular culture across the globe. And as a result of that, true to what it means to be black is that anything that comes from us then is under such harsh criticism.
Correct.
Because it's a systemic response to having us remember that we are both hated and that anything that we produce is also thus hated. But then the funny thing is that when we start to shame ourselves for what it is that we managed to produce and we let it go, that's when everybody else decides they want to adopt it. So
yes.
We start seeing aspects of black Ebonics or black lingo on things like television shows like Friends.
Correct.
One of the most generally white shows that existed in primetime American television, you start hearing them utilize aspects of Black informal language. So again, it's the illusion that informal Ebonics in Black culture doesn't have value. But I tell students all the time, and as people are probably listening to me speak, like you hear a variation of what we call code meshing, where I take both the formal aspects of our language and the informal aspects of our language, and I mesh the two together. I understand the rules about how both operate independent of one another, but I also know how to break those rules and utilize the two effectively together. And what you're starting to see as an emergence in at least American popular culture is that even white people are starting to mesh what they are adopting as aspects of Black informal language as this fun engagement of interplay with language.
You're absolutely right. As a matter of fact, you hit on something that speaks to that eclipsing tweet. And we were talking about it prior to going on the air. But you hit right on it. The very thing now that has become, I can't even say it how you said it. I'll have to go back and listen to the recording. But the very thing that now, okay, African Americans now taking that on as their own, and now it's become hated because it's something that is, but at the same time, I want to copy it. To me, that's the whole, not only am I going to copy it, I'm going to take it over as if it were mine. Right. That's what that whole eclipsing tweet is about. That's
we've seen that before, and that's what I want people to understand in the context of what I've written in News Chaser, in Chapter 5, where I'm discussing Yorugu rhetoric, psychopathy, and savagery. I'm saying we've seen these things before, and we have got to pay attention. And if we are not paying attention, then really it's a loss. And we can stop with all of the hotepping and everything else and just go into small communities of conscious Black folks that will just support and take care of each other, because it's no longer really it's a moot point to try to save, if you will, all Black folks. It's like
right.
Either you're gonna wake up from this experience of witnessing Donald Trump, or either you are going to stay asleep or choose to stay asleep. And I relate it for my students to the Matrix all the time. It's, which pill do you want to take? Because whichever pill you take, once you awake, there's no going back.
That's absolutely right.
It is what it is, because once you're down that rabbit hole, you can only dig further in depth. You can't back your way out of it. So it's a choice that folks choose to make. But we've seen it time and time again. Black folks got big old lips. Well, now lip injections are
yes.
the thing. Black women have big old butts, which is, and that's sagopygia, right? It was considered a medical disease by which black folks have been ridiculed historically throughout.
Correct.
And so now it's the Kim Kardashian. And
correct.
All of the
Jennifer Lopez and also forth and so on. Yes.
Absolutely. But then it takes somebody like Nicki Minaj, albeit I don't make determinations necessarily about whether certain hip-hop artists are being intentional or unintentional in their consciousness about how they present a thing. But in the echoes of even Nicki Minaj's song, I can see the video, ironically enough, better than I can actually even articulate the song. But it borrows from Sir Mix-a-Lot's Baby Got Back. But if you will, that song and Nicki Minaj's representation of that song then provides yet and still a Black female-led sense of empowerment and charge about the fact that, Black women got butt and now white women want to have butt and all of those things. But it's still, the point is, we've seen these things time and time again. Their formula, white people's formula, white supremacist formula, white hegemony, white governmental control's formula does not change. It is usually the same, just remixed into something to fit the modern context.
That's correct.
They always wanted us to hate the things that we have so that they could take it on as their own, because if we hate the thing that we have, we will forget about it.
Correct.
If we forget about it, it makes it easy for them to then be able to pick up in a historical context, rewrite history, and say it always started with them.
And see, again, and I'm going to keep referencing because this is my latest post was on this whole eclipse tweet. That's what I was talking about when we were off the air in terms of that tweet. That little meme was symbolic way beyond Trump and Obama. That was symbolic of exactly what you're talking about.
Correct. There's nothing new that they are managing to do.
It's not, and that's why it is incumbent upon us, like you just said. Like, I guess that's where the frustration comes. Is like, okay, there are a lot of us who are awake, but it's not enough. And even sometime whenever you're trying to help folks wake up, they're still, like, metaphorically speaking, fighting you and say, "Leave me the F alone."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of which you should. So, like, for example, one of the things so when I was writing Yoruba rhetoric, it's because I had just started reading a lot of material by really prolific Black authors. Amani Sheketi Ani, Dr. Amani Sheketi Ani out of the Sunni system in New York, she has a book called Insight. So she is, in essence, an African-centered psychologist who really deals with, like, child developmental psychology. And one of the things that I really appreciate about her work, a lot of the things that I appreciate about my work and the work of so many of these scholars that are in News Chaser, is that we really try to tap into the heart and essence of what the problem is and then talk about the problem as it exists so that people can start to see the problem before we start to really talk about what the resolution is. And for hoteppers, if you will, I almost feel terrible that such a sacred word has been commonized into just this everyday terminology that almost makes certain people feel like us and them,
right?
Black people, because yet again, it becoming part of the popular culture is a way to diminish the power and the effect of it. That's another strategy. Like, we're talking strategy and tactics of white supremacy, even when white supremacy doesn't seem like it's evident, because, you know, if you turn around and you say to somebody, you whisper a rumor into somebody's ear, and the person then acts in a violent way towards somebody else as a result of the rumor, well, then you don't have to be present in order to have enacted the thing, right? The very action itself allows you to remove yourself from the circumstance but still have an impact. And that's what white supremacy has managed to do. It's so
exactly
ingrained in how we function that now it doesn't have to say that we got to burn crosses in front of people's homes. The trauma of that now has Black folks acting against Black folks in a way that still echoes the same divide and conquer tactics that were strategically put in place when the Dutch determined that there should be context of white and Black for the ma'afa or the Black enslavement to occur. So what myself, in essence, A.L. Sakai in Afrocentric Before Afrocentricity, which is a series of poems, in what News Chaser and what Eyesight by Dr. Amani Sheketi Ani have managed to write are really these treatments for understanding in part what our problem has been, but then also what the solution is in terms of reorienting ourselves into a proper sense of being so that we can function in accordance to our own cultural standards and not live in the confines and shadows, eclipsed, if you will, by other people.
You've hit on it, and it's like I said, and you've said it in an intellectual way, or an intellectual manner. How do you get that message out to the common, ordinary, everyday Joe on the street or the Raheem on the street?
So it depends on the person, and I think what you're leaning towards is something that's of critical importance, and that's that many of these conversations need to become everyday coffee table conversations.
Yes.
That it can become so intellectual, if you will, and sound so academic that a lot of people aren't able to keep up. And so the delivery to a everyday Black person, that's just like, listen, I didn't graduate from high school, or I got a GED, or whatever the case may be, which is not an indictment on their intellect, right? It's an indictment on their educational achievement, but just because you don't have educational achievement does not mean that you lack intellect. Because there are some brothers from around the way that didn't have the same opportunities that I had that will run circles around me even now.
That's right.
With a PhD. And so, I'm very clear that intellect can exist in a variety of spaces. So what I say to them is this. We have to just simply become aware of the fact that we have to make decisions on a daily basis about what we subscribe to, what you take in, and what you put out. So what you take in through mass media is a series of images and things of that nature that are both either functional or dysfunctional.
Right.
So although I generally will watch, like, for example, some snippets of, like, Real Housewives of Atlanta, for example, that's dysfunctional black culture.
Correct.
And most of them don't really live that way. Like,
correct.
Who can be successful in such a regard but constantly live in dysfunction where there's distrust, betrayal, hatred, violence? Like, that's not what we do as black folks. And a lot of these black folks' grandparents, if they really are oriented in black culture, would be like, how dare you get on television and cut the fool like this?
I know that's right.
This is how we do. You understand what I'm saying? But the absence of old guard grandparents means that we don't have people to guide the values of the black culture. So a new generation grows up thinking that, lip popping and, neck turning or chicken heading, if you will, becomes the standard for how you express grievance against one another.
Right.
Or that, that it's normal to sit in social circles with people that you can't stand and to throw drinks in their face like that actually means a whole lot in the context of what you are trying to express. So I talk about it in the context of American popular culture. I talk about it in the context of film and radio and music, because when we are absorbing those things into our subconscious, we are also absorbing the values that we think are now the standard.
You're absolutely right. And see,
is that those things are not the standard.
You're absolutely right. And see, and again, I need to share some information and do what I need to do, but we need to understand it's systematic. It's by design, subconsciously or subliminally, because of course no one is going to tell you that I'm consciously doing this, but you can call it what you want it. And that's where, for me, it's like, once you see the game, it's kind of like you said about the Matrix. Once you kind of see what the game is, you don't have an excuse for falling back into the old patterns.
And black folks should be able to do that better than anybody.
That's right.
Black folks have coined the phrase, game recognized game.
That's exactly right.
I'm waiting on you. Recognize the game.
That's exactly right. Recognize the game. And that, again, that's the frustrating part with me, is like dealing with an urban in an urban area. That's the biggest frustration, because I know for a fact I've recognized the game long ago. As a matter of fact, that's what I'm constantly preaching, is how to recognize the game and recognize the game. And why aren't you recognizing the game? But once you recognize, it's kind of like that. If you put it in the other vernacular, once you know better, you got to do better. That's where, for me, we have to do our part. In order for the game not to be played on us, we need to go out and now start playing the game, recognizing what the game is and playing as well. And that's where I'm constantly challenging us to do our part. I'm constantly challenging us to do the education, get our education. And because once you get the education, you use it for what you will.
Well,
but you got to get it.
That's why I wrote this piece on white nationalism, Urugu rhetoric, psychopathy, and savagery. I took all aspects of my education and melded them together to be able to say that as an organizational behaviorist, what are these aspects of psychosis that I managed to see going through the tweets that Donald Trump produces? And then I start to examine that in a communicative way. I mean, I pieced together a variety of different things to create a tapestry that said, well, if I follow this reverberation from Donald Trump's tweets into the likes of Adolf Hitler, into the likes of Shakespearean literature, into the likes of Greco-Roman philosophy, then what I started to see is a pattern develop.
Right.
It was my game recognized their game. So I started to say, wow, so if my game is to be, in essence, a behavioral psychologist who specializes in rhetoric, which is in essence, the body performs, as the body consistently performs something, it becomes behavioral, right? But that behavior communicates something. So if I meld communication and behavior together, then I can start to say, well, wait a minute, there's a connection between what you say and what you do, the thought and the action. And in piecing these two pieces together, I can write an entire volume about what this looks like in white history, because white folks have done enough about their idea of black history. Now, with this new insurgence of young black intellects coming along on the shoulders of your Dr. Molefi K. Asante's and Maulana Karangas and Jacob Carruthers and, the like, Francis Cress Welsing and just several others, it's like, okay, so now we're going to write about how we see you.
Exactly.
Light fashion by which we see you. And this is not about trying to go tit for tat and say that in News Chaser, this is my way of trying to clap back, if you will, at white folks. Is to be able to say, for the benefit of my black people, I need to create something that outlines exactly what this is in the truth and fact. Because there's a difference between truth and there's a difference between truth and fact. But in both truth and fact, I need to delineate what this looks like, outline what this looks like, so that we can recognize the games that they have engaged in time and time again. Because by all intent and purposes, there is no way, shape, or form by which Donald Trump should, in fact, be the president of the United States. Now,
that's correct.
That's not necessarily a fact if we're just talking general verbalization of one's opinion, but it does become a fact when we then cross-compare the level of education and the type of career trajectories that past presidents have had. He then becomes the anomaly. And the way that his anomalous existence as president can only be characterized is the clapback of white supremacy, to be able to say black folks have done now the ultimate thing that we thought they'd never be able to do, and that's run the free world.
Correct.
And as a result of that, we have got to reorient ourselves back into a sense of our supremacy.
Correct.
Is why you have so many black folks getting gunned down by white folks. It is a systematic response. If you can imagine a splinter cell, if you imagine somebody who is planted in a community or into a population of people, imagine like Cold War, for example, these undercover agents that are planted in communities that don't become active until they hear a particular code or until they receive a particular message, and then they act contrary to whatever the peaceful circumstance of that community would have produced. Well, that's what you have with white folks. White folks said, oh, wait a minute. A black man has been offered to have control of government. Oh, we got to put all these,
bingo,
but all these niggas back in place.
Bingo.
When you see them, shoot them.
No, I mean, and when you look at the big picture, when you look at the grand scheme of things, on the Republican side, there were 18 candidates. On the Democratic side, there were 5 candidates, and you had a couple of independents, so forth and so on. Donald Trump was able to get around 17 other candidates plus the 5 Democratic candidates. And as you just said, he ran on the fact that he did not have the political experience. And boy, is that coming true to form. But
yeah.
He came about exactly what you just said, because the reason he was able to win was because he tapped into something that he says and does what they wish they could say and do, but he does it without any consequences per se. And that's what resonated with them.
Through the exercise of white privilege.
Yes.
And that really resonates with them, because then it's like, see what white privilege does for me? I can bring this back, and it can also work for you. But now let me just be very clear too, though. When a person like Hillary Clinton uses the phrase super predator to describe, because, black folks generally don't get referred to as super by white folks in no context.
Right.
So we ain't superheroes for men, we ain't super women or Wonder Women or none of that. So when a white female says super predator and then backtracks out of that statement, she can't get forgiveness for now what you have put out there. Because see, the Tyler Perry movie said, it's your private thoughts that cause me pause.
Right.
See, it's when people's private thoughts get echoed into the public sphere where we don't have to pause anymore. So don't pause on that soundbite where she referred to black folks as super predators. Let that be an understanding of some of the deep-seated, even if it's unconscious, orientation of what she thinks about black folks coming into public sphere.
Right.
So although she could have politically led the country in a different way, I do want black folks to understand that whiteness is whiteness is whiteness, whether you're getting it from the most lily white person that's oriented in white racist or white supremacist rhetoric, or whether you get it from somebody who's learned how to massage some of that language and mask it. Again, game got to recognize game in the context of what people say and what people do.
And that's what I need, folks. If you don't take anything else away from this conversation that we've had, take that last line he just said. Game need to recognize game in the context of what people say and what people do. And if you really get good at it, you'll be able to read between the lines, as he was just saying. And they call it now the dog whistle. That's the term that we've been hearing lately, is the dog whistling.
That's right. And ironically enough, as we talk about dog whistling, there's a historical context where in white culture, they were attempting to develop from what they borrowed from, for example, ancient Kemet, these different schools of thought, these philosophical schools of thought. And the school of cynics actually was a school of thought where white folks were trying to reorient themselves back into a sense of communalism with nature. And this sort of is my way of lending support to Dr. Marimba Ani's idea about Yurugu being a aspect of a West African cultural perspective on whiteness that said white people are anti-nature people. They are incomplete spiritual beings and the like. And so this idea of trying to figure out a way to connect with nature, because they are anti-nature people, was to develop the school of cynics. And when you get to the etymology is the study of the root words by which words have been created. The root of that word is actually canine or dog-like.
Right.
And so to talk about in good fashion what it means to be able to catch wind of the dog whistle is to understand that you are catching wind of the implicit thin veil of what's not being said between the thought and the action
Correct.
of white folks so that you can recognize their game.
Correct.
So that is a central piece to what I've written about as part of News Chaser in Chapter 5 of Yurugu Rhetoric, Psychopathy and Savagery.
If by chance you just joined us, and as I said, personally, I hope you've been with us since 6, but certainly if you didn't join me at 6, you joined me at 7. And you've been with us since then. My guest is KenZoe Brian J. Selassie, Ph.D. We're talking about a lot of things, but they all lead to his contribution to the book News Chaser, Chapter 5, as you just heard him say. And the title of his piece is The Art of the Rhetoric of White Nationalism, Yurugu Rhetoric, Psychopathy and Savagery. Let me share this information with you, and then we'll be right back. We're not going anywhere, but you know what to do. Get on your social media sites. Let somebody know, man, that's a deep one this morning.
You wanted to be a teacher when you were little, but as you grew up, things changed. Teaching just didn't seem like the best option anymore, so you decided to become something else. But what would your 12-year-old self say? Interesting and innovative things are happening in teaching today, so it's time to put it back on your list. Don't try to convince yourself otherwise. You had it right the first time.
Find out how you can make more at teach.org. Make more. Teach. Brought to you by Teach and the Ad Council.
I started going cold turkey. Well, at least when I'm in the car.
I know I shouldn't do it, but it's so hard to stop. That's why I hide it from myself, so I won't be tempted.
I used to do it all the time. I stopped by locking it in my glove compartment.
My friend used to do it way too much. Now I turn it off when we're in the car.
My solution is simple. I just don't do it.
There are lots of ways to stop yourself and others from texting and driving. How will you stop? Tell us at stoptextstoprex.org. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
My name is Diamonds. I am a radio DJ in North Jersey. I broadcast on the frequency of 88.7 FM. I will be on the air every Saturday from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. when the sun is setting in the sky. If you are out there, if anyone is out there, I can provide music, I can provide entertainment. If there's anybody out there, anybody, please.
Club Melting Pot. Every Saturday from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. Only on WP 88.7 FM, Brave New Radio.
You're listening to The Reading Circle with Marc Medley on Brave New Radio.
Yes, indeed. We are in an extended version of The Reading Circle. And as I shared with you prior to sharing that information, would you say, I hate to say we're taking a break. Well, we're taking a break from talking, but we're not going anywhere, and I don't want you to go anywhere. So I say I share the information with you. But my guest is KenZoe Brian J. Selassie, PhD, and we're talking about the art of the rhetoric of white nationalism. Now, there was something you said prior to me sharing that information, and that was this notion of, particularly with our group today, our generation today, our young African Americans, our young black folks today who are getting educated and moving on into the doctorate and research levels, they're beginning, like you said, our history, interestingly enough, were always written by Caucasians. And now, as you said, we're kind of flipping the script and saying, you know what, hey, you've always written our history. Now we're going to write the history in terms of how we see you. And what came to my mind when you said that was the thought back in slavery time, when the effort for us not to read, to learn how to read and to learn how to write was so strong. I mean, you could be killed if you were caught reading with a book. If you were the slave master or his wife or whatever, and you were caught teaching the slave how to read, you could be killed. And the interesting part in 2017, at that time, you could be killed for trying to learn how to read. And now we're dying because we won't read. Mm-hmm. And so for the fact that you said that we're now turning this, that was the fear to begin with, because I'm truly convinced that there are just certain things that folks know. And they're operating, that's why the systematic design is in place. And they're operating based on that fear. Matter of fact, and I said this last week, in my mind and research and everything that I know, the whole supremacy thing really is about inferiority. That's where the supremacy thing comes from to begin with, is this whole inferiority. Right now, and I could be wrong, but I don't think so. I honestly believe in the deepest of Donald Trump, there's some inferiority there, and he feels very inferior to Obama, and he's doing everything he can to get rid of that inferiority feeling. And if that means I have to take away everything that he put in place to feel superior to him, then that's what I'm going to do. But there's some serious inferiority going on, and that's where, for me, the whole KKK, the supremacists, the nationalists, all of that really isn't based on inferiority and not superiority.
You know, there's a passage where I think it's like on page 84. I generally have a photographic memory, but my mind, as I get older, those photographs start looking a little blurry in my head. But I think it's on page 84. As a matter of fact, hold on, let me grab this book. But on page 84, I think it's that I talk about this idea of stolen legacy. I think like in the first paragraph, and then I transition into saying that the promotion of white superiority and white intelligence has always been precipitated by a psychopathic savagery where they proclaim to have certain types of knowledge and achievement that we, in fact, through the likes of George James' 1954 work in Stolen Legacy, know just isn't true, right?
Correct.
They try to debunk, George James, like this is not factual. But it's like, but these are from some of the very notes of white folks who were traveling. Like, this is from your people's own writings and experiences, right?
Correct.
And so we start to understand that they try to represent themselves as the originators of different types of rhetoric, chemistry, arithmetic, and the like. But a lot of that, when you call them out on the carpet results in a type of petulant childishness. And so, again, when you look at what people say and what people do, when Donald Trump gets called to the carpet about his tweets, he acts in a way that is true to the nature of a white, petulant child who is very clear about their sense of entitlement, that tantrums can be thrown, you can finger point. And in my class, I always tell students that while children are not necessarily psychopaths, the context by which a child can say, oh, let me have the keys, and you let a kid have your keys to your car, and then it's time for you to go, so you want your keys back, so then the kid is like, no, mine. And it's like, right. But your feet don't reach the pedals, your little eyes can't see over the steering wheel, you can barely control the steering wheel. Like in no way, shape, or form should you be able to say that these keys are now yours, because they also don't belong to you because you didn't even buy the car.
Correct.
But in every instance of history, what we find is the collective aspect of whiteness. Now, I want to be real clear that I'm not dogging out white folks in an entire vacuum. This is not me being reversed racist,
right,
because reverse racism does not exist.
Right.
So in order to have racism, so let's clear up a couple of things. In order to have racism, you have to have a system where you can actually oppress people
Correct.
and deny people access to different things.
Correct.
That is not what black people do. So
Correct.
For all these black folks and white folks that walk around talking about, well, I don't want to be a racist, at best, a black person might only be able to be prejudiced. And that prejudice is so limited to isolated
Correct.
individual circumstances that it has no real significant impact on the quality of life by which white privilege, white citizenship, white civility exists. Let's be real clear that black folks cannot be racist because they do not have a system to exercise that level of power to deny other people anything exists.
And I'm so glad you said that. I'm so glad you said, because I tell people all the time, when I have these type of discussions, I'm not coming up out of hate. I'm not coming out, but I am coming out from the standpoint of educating all of us. Yeah. And whenever you observe and you can see, because see, you just said it again, and I keep referring back to the Eclipse tweet in terms of, don't look at that on face value in terms of Donald Trump, his face, because each one, there's 4 pictures in there. It's the sequence of the eclipse, and you'll see Obama in the beginning picture, and you'll see Donald Trump coming into the picture. Then you'll see Donald Trump covering Obama a little bit more, and by the 4th picture, it's just Donald Trump. He's now covered Obama altogether. There's more to that picture than meets the eye, and what we're talking about this morning is just that. That's an exact representation of the systematic approach that has occurred and continues to occur. And all we're saying is, folks, wake up to it.
Correct. Now the beauty of all of this, because I don't want black folks to walk away feeling disheartened, like, okay, well, it's a wrap. We've lost this racial thing. I shudder to call it anything other than a phenomenon or a thing, lest I use terminology that then incites people's sensibilities, and that's not what I intend to do. But in the context of just the racial disagreements, if you will, that exist about how we are, where we are, who gets what in the context of privilege and society, equitably, because the goal should be to get things equitable and not equally. And even then, what they got ain't necessarily what we should even want, because they, again, are not the standard, because they live a very different life. Like, so what I try to articulate in News Chaser is the essence of what I've written about is to be able to say that all human beings are not the same, that all communication is not the same, and that all culture is not the same, and that we have a variety of different identities by virtue of our gender identity, our national identity, our racial identity, our ethnic identity, our religious or spiritual identity. Like, we have all of these different things going, but we usually tune into the racial identity, which is about this colorism, right? And people try to, like, dismiss that, like, oh, well, race is just a social construct, so I don't even know why we're having this conversation. Well, you know, you got to play that card when you know it's stacked in the deck. Right. So if we know that race as a social construct exists and has existed to our detriment, we can't afford to then say, well, because it's a social construct, let's not pay it any attention anymore. if anything, because it's a social construct that these white folks have managed to create so that they could enslave black people, it means that we have to pay even more attention to it. But here's the silver lining in it all. If you think about a color palette, something as simple as a color palette, in as much as Donald Trump's tweet to be able to eclipse Barack Obama may exist, one of the things that we know scientifically as fact is that white is never going to blot out nothing of color.
That's correct.
Whiteness cannot blot out anything of color. Now, it may dilute the color, but the colorism is always going to be there. And ultimately, that's what Frances Cress Welsing is arguing in the ISIS papers.
ISIS papers, that's right.
You know, she says that part of white folks' sense of hating black folks, so if black folks ever wonder, well, why do white people hate black people so much? It's because they're worried about genetic annihilation. Because if anything of color comes into contact to procreate with whiteness, it is going to produce a variation of color, not whiteness. So they are worried about their own extinction. But, you know, the reality is, again, borrowing from American popular culture, because, you know, I do tend to, you know, revel in both Marvel and DC comic movies. In one of the Superman films, the woman that was from Krypton said, you know, evolution always wins. And in evolution, racially, you know that the colorism is always going to win because whiteness blots out no aspect of color.
Right. And see that the whole description that you gave in terms of us being different, for me, in my mind, that should be something that's celebrated. But it's always used for judgment, always used as a power play, wherein the differences of each group or each race or each color or each background, whatever, they all come together to make something great. Versus, well, mine is better than yours, or my color is better than your color, so forth and so on. That's where I get, for me, it's kind of like, you know what, this really is game. Because truth be told, like you just said, if you really get down into the facts, if anybody had the opportunity to try to pull the game that was pulled, it would be the people of color.
Yes.
Based on fact, based on science.
Yes. Now, the caution that I tell black people is this. You know, so when you're talking about trying to find an appreciation for white folks, like on an individual basis, you will find white people who are kind and sweet and courteous and civil and all of those things. But, you know, for me, it's what lies beneath that I'm concerned about because, see, it's easy to be nice to people and it's easy to be civil and it's easy to be thoughtful and all of these things when things go your way.
Yes.
But it's when the stuff hit the fan that I'm concerned about who you going to be, and that's a character issue. So, you know, in this white vacuum of trying to make everything universal, it's like, well, we're all human beings, and we should all just be about the love and not be about the hate. Well, one, it always seemed like when black people try to be about the love of loving themselves, white people hate it.
Right.
And they fail to realize that black self-love is not an anti-white.
Correct.
Right? Me loving black people is not an anti-white sentiment. Me loving black people is just me loving black people. But we can't talk about black people loving themselves if it don't include white people. And if it excludes them like black girls rock, then all of a sudden we got a problem. And that's what I mean when I say that in black culture, we value character, good character, over love. Because with good character comes this understanding that whether I love you or whether I like you, I'm going to do right by you.
Correct.
But if love is the pinnacle by which you judge a thing, then it means that you almost got to be in a position where you say you love something in order to even halfway do right by it. And we all know that go wrong because you look at personal relationships, intimate relationships and affairs, relationships whereby somebody will beat on somebody and say that that's love, and you can't say that it's not because love is simply a word that we use to figure out how we are making a connection to one another. So love could be anything at any given time according to the two or more people that are sharing the experience.
That's correct.
So it's really just a word. It's how you engage and connect with that word starts to have meaning. So for all intents and purposes, love ain't really saving nobody. And love ain't going to be the answer to this equation. And if you counting on that, as a resolution to the circumstance from white folks' standard of being, then yes, we really in trouble. We got problems. Now, if we go from a black cultural perspective and understand that it's about the character that you have to be able to discern and assess somebody's saying and doing, then we can figure some things out. Because if we can get to the character of who people are, then you can say, okay, well, you know what? I can excuse this mistake because it's outside of your character. So we just need to reorient you back into the function of your character, right? Because the character is the default essence of who you are. Everything else is personality. And I'm not into personalities. I'm into who your character is.
But see, that's my issue, and that's what I said earlier in terms of this whole debate with the statues. It's not about the statues. You could keep every statue it is what it is. That was a part of the history or whatever. You can keep every statue up you want to. It's about what's in the heart. It's about what's in the deepest part of a person, as you just said, that conscious, that subconscious. That's what it's all about. And until we start impacting and changing that, you could tear down all the statues you want. It won't matter.
Well, that's why in what I've written as Yoruba rhetoric, psychopathy and savagery, what I'm really outlining, and again, this is for namely black folks to be able to read, to have an understanding of how whiteness actually exists. And Donald Trump is really a standalone example of this, which is why I end that chapter talking about Donald Trump's tweets. But I didn't want to talk about Donald Trump's tweets and tweeting as an aspect of psychopathy and savagery, because they're, when I say savagery, people think physical violence, but savagery can also occur by virtue of what you verbalize to people. Verbal abuse is real. And he
Correct.
is a very verbally abusive president, but it's because of his psychosis. Like, he operates in a disillusioned reality that is what permeates and echoes whiteness. How do you think black folks managed to create an underground railroad in a space and terrain that they had never navigated before, other than the fact that they realized at some point, whether we articulate it in clinical terms or not as psychopathy, they realized these white folks are crazy. And these white folks are so disillusioned by our dumbness that if we just play into their psychopathy, if you will, we actually might be able to survive and escape. And so that's what we managed to do. And so in Yoruba rhetoric, I'm trying to become very clear in a fact-based context about the manifestation of the preeminent representation of white supremacy, which is Donald Trump. And thank God for him, because he represents an awakening that black people are either going to have now or not have probably ever. Because he is the epitome of white privilege, white supremacy, and a white rhetoric that tries to persuade by any means necessary for you to believe in things that are not oriented in anybody's healthy sense of reality, much less fact.
That's correct. And we're down to the last couple of minutes.
Read chapter 5 of what I've contributed to the book. Then my inclination is, God bless you, but you ain't going to get it, so we got to move on.
I know, that's right. Well, I tell you what, we're down to the last couple of minutes, and I always I turned the mic over earlier, but any book signings, appearances, how folks can get in touch with you, your website, you got a minute for all of that to let folks know how to get in touch with KenZoe.
All right, so you can get in touch with me through my website. My website is KB, B as in boy, Selassie, S as in Sam, E as in Edward, L as in Larry, A as in Apple, double S as in Sam, I as in Ice, E as in Edward, kbselassie.com. You can also access News Chaser through Amazon.com, as well as several other book outlets. Check out all of the chapters, because all of the contributors are off the chain. But I'm telling you, check out chapter 5. Black folks particularly are going to read it and laugh. Like, my class is always laughing. They're like, this chapter is off the hook. Like, you're saying some really way out there stuff, but it's fact-based. So it's like, I can't deny it, but it's just like, I've never heard a black person go in on whiteness and white people like this in such a fact-based way. Usually it's through emoting because we just upset about something.
Right.
But to spit facts and call their game out for what it is has, it's got my students in my class with a their head snapped back. But
I know that's right.
Folks can access me through my website. Also, I'm the chair of the Department of English, Foreign Language, and Mass Communication at Benedict College. You can call into Benedict College. You can find me that way. There are times where I'm Facebooking live various segments of my class lectures. And so I don't mind for the world through social media to be able to sit in on some of my lectures and chime in through comments. I oftentimes will go in and answer any questions that people post when I have some time. And then that's really it. Like, I'm appreciative of this time and space.
Man, same here. I have enjoyed the conversation. I don't even like the word enjoy. It's not even a matter about an enjoyment, but I've been challenged and thought-provoked immensely in terms of our conversation, and we definitely will have to keep in touch on Twitter or either in the email or whatever. I know you said you want to get my email, so maybe I'll have to, you know what I'll do? I'll text you. My blog post site so that you can check out the one that I keep talking about, the I Think Too Deep one, as well as some other ones that are in there. But again, it is a matter of, like you said, once you go down that rabbit hole, there is no going back. And the more people we can get going down that rabbit hole, the better. It's not about white hatred. It's not about that. It's because some people would take that and say, oh, this is that racist talk. No, it's not. But it is what it is in terms of what it is, and more folks need to understand what it is.
We've got to love ourselves more than we love and forgive other people. We've got to learn how to love and forgive ourselves more than we love and forgive other people. And Yoruba rhetoric is really speaking to that. It says, this is who they are, so let's realize that and then move on so that we reorient our focus into the betterment of ourselves and our own community.
All right. With that said, my next DJ is up, my good friend Barry. He's coming in next with the Naked Brunch. But Dr. Selassie, thank you so much for joining this morning. I will be in touch with you as well as Denise or Ayo. And, we'll take it from there. But I wish you all the best with News Chaser. And again, make sure you all read Chapter 5. All right. That ends another edition of the Reading Circle with your host, Marc Medley. As I always leave you in parting, may you live as long as you want and not want as long as you live. Live each day as if it were your last, because one day, regardless of who you are or are not, it will be. Have a great week. We'll be together again, God willing, next Saturday morning.